Good afternoon, everybody. This is Tammy Zimmel, the VP of Marketing at the Estimating Edge, and welcome, everybody. Thank you for attending. Today, Steve Manning, who is one of our training and technical support specialists, will be covering pricing and labor for version 12 today. We added something new this webinar, and at the very top of your screen, you're going to see a little section that says Handouts, which is the V12 keyboard shortcut. So for those that would like to have that, you can click on that link and then right-click when it opens up into a new window, and then you can save it. But if you have any troubles, you can send us a note, and we can help you during the webinar too. Before we get started, we just have a couple housekeeping items. For those who have attended before, you know that everybody's on mute. And if you have any questions, you can type in the questions box. At the very end of this webinar or tomorrow morning, I'm going to send you the recording for this webinar so you can re-listen to it, or you can go to our website and I'll post it on the on-demand website link section. At the very end, we're going to be sending, when you exit, there's a 3-question exit survey, and that's really important because that way we know we're giving you and delivering you the right topics that are relevant to you. And then for next month's webinar, we have all about reports, and that's going to be on September 26th, and will be with version 12. And then the one in October will be version 12, the condition schedule, and this is just for the interior folks. So with that, I'm going to kick it off to Steve. Steve, it's all yours.
Yep. Thanks, Tammy. Appreciate everybody attending today. We're going to be going through version 12 pricing and labor. I'm going to be using a trade of roofing, but it's going to apply to everybody for what I'm going to show you today. When you go to the pricing screen, you'll notice that you got some columns here. The order quantity would be the quantity that you did measure. Order unit is the unit of measurement that was measured in. So you can see we have squares of insulation and rolls of membrane with a unit price. This is priced out by square foot for your membrane, and the net cost would be the cost of the item for the job as it sits so far until you make some adjustments. You'll notice on the far left, though, you have some green and red squares. Now, the green is showing that everything has been satisfied. There's no problems with this item, but I got some membrane here with a red square, and that's selected. If I go over to the panel on the far right, it'll tell me that item that I'm sitting on, page where it comes from, section, scenario, and the bid name. And in red, most importantly, is telling me what item or what issue needs to be resolved for this material item. In this case, it's asking me for a unit price being the square foot price of this material. And I can simply put in a price of, let's say, 54 cents a square foot, and that is now green, so that's been satisfied. So we don't have to worry about that item now. If we go down here a little bit more, I have some more items here. A fastening plate, also looking for a unit price. So I'm just going to put in $40 a carton for that. That's been satisfied. And if we go down farther than that, I have a cleanup labor. Now, it's looking for more than one thing. It's not looking for just the unit price. It's looking for a user code and possibly other items that need to be resolved. That's when you can use one of our tools at the top called the wizard. By clicking on the wizard, which is just the little stick with the wand, little star on it, it's going to wizard you and ask you some specific questions pertaining to the problem with that item. In this case, it's going to ask me what the item's user code is, and you'll come across this especially when you create a new item from scratch in the miscellaneous. So I'm just going to select the drop down, and I'm going to scroll up and find a labor that would, or a material that would satisfy that, and we're just going to call this a miscellaneous material. I'm going to hit next, and it's going to ask me how do we order it. It's by the each, and how would we price this out by the each. And since this is just throwing a number at the job, in this case, I'm just going to put in $100, hit next. And if we do have a part number assigned, this is where you can enter that as well, or just skip by it. And if you want to add any waste percent, you add that here as well. And then you come back with some checked options, and this is what you want to send back to the database. Being that it's a new item, you may want to include order formula, order unit, user code, and waste percent. It's up to you if you want to add the price to the database, because that might fluctuate between jobs. So I'm just going to hit finish here, leave it the way it is. And now that has been satisfied, and cleanup is now has a number assigned to it, a $100 number. We have another one down here, lap sealant. Same thing, it's looking for user code and a unit price here. I'm going to run the wizard on that again. And we know that this is going to be a roofing material. And let me scroll up here. There we go. And this item is estimated by the lineal foot. It's a tube of caulk. It can be the same for the drywall industry as fire stop, fire caulk. But we order it by, in this case, we're going to show you how you can order it by the tube. So I'm going to put in tube, and the item is priced by the tube. You can hit next, and it's going to ask you a couple different questions to try to, that one may not make sense. There's more than one lineal foot in a tube. There's more than one tube in a lineal foot. Well, in this case, the top option is correct. And we're going to say that there are 20 feet, lineal feet in the tube. If this was 0, just make this 20. And if you want this item to be able to be auto-rounded with other material when you go to run your pricing, just make sure you have this radio button checked to yes. Hit next. And we put in a price per tube. I'm going to put in just $7. Hit next. And no part number at this point. Maybe we can put in maybe a 5% waste. Hit next, and I'll send that price back to the database because that pretty much stays the same for a while. And now our lap sealant has been satisfied, so we got no other green or red squares to resolve any issues with pricing. Now, another thing that's a handy tool to have in the pricing screen is the ability to replace items in one shot, even if they're being used across multiple conditions. It's called replace tilde codes. And in this case, I'm going to use an example of some insulation. And this would work well for drywallers. Maybe you want to change a stud gauge length or width or even type. The double arrows here, if you hover over it, it'll tell you what that is. It's replace tilde codes. And it's going to ask you some questions. In this case, it's asking me for the thickness of the insulation, width, length, and the type. If I wanted to change this from a specific insulation from one to the other, I could simply go in here, and maybe they just want coverboard. I'll just choose a coverboard in this case, and everything else stays the same. Maybe I want to use maybe a 1/4 inch coverboard, but this is where you would maybe change your stud gauge width and length in the drywall industry. I'm going to hit apply. And now my insulation has been changed to coverboard. Now let's say you got to change something over multiple conditions. This second column here with the pound sign, you see numbers here. Top one here for the coverboard is a number 1. That's telling you that it's being used in one place in this job, and over on the far right side, here's where it's being used. Now, right below that, we have some APDM membrane, but it has a number 6 to it. Well, I can't go in there and I could do a replace tilde codes on all those items at once and change the width of the roll, or change this maybe out to TPO for an alternate bid. Hit apply. So I don't have to go into those 6 conditions to change them one at a time. But let's say I wanted to go in and update some conditions. If you were back on the coverboard, you certainly got another tool here called Condition CP for Condition Properties. It'll take you right out to the conditions page. But if you double click on an instance that's greater than 1, that has more instances in it, like this TPO, double click on it, it takes me out to details of where each of this material is being used. It tells me the page. If I had multiple pages, it would break out each page and what condition that's being used. Now, if I just wanted to update specific conditions and I don't want to run replace tilde codes on everything, I can simply select one of those conditions, go to condition properties, takes you out to that condition where you can make the change on the material that needs to be updated without having to replace all 6 at once. So that's how the replace tilde codes and accessing condition properties work. Now, if you do have items that you've updated pricing for or user codes or things like that, and you want to send that back to the database as a material with that information moving forward, you can simply select an item or mark it with the blue arrow on the far left, and we have send to database, which is these cylinders with the blue arrow pointing down. And in this case, if you updated the price, or maybe the order formula order unit, or maybe you added some waste percent or updated a user code, you can mark that item and hit OK, or choose to select all if you want to update everything and just hit OK. Now that item will be, next time you use that item in a new job, it's going to come all set up for you, ready to go with that new pricing and order formula and unit set up for you already. Now you also have the option to mark specific items that you want to send to a vendor for like a pricing fax report. And you can mark those specific items, click on your report, and choose the appropriate report that you need to send it to, and it will allow you to just send a report or create a report to either fax or save as a PDF just for the items that you have checked in the pricing screen. So that's pretty convenient right there as well. You also have the ability to mark specific items and download to an Excel spreadsheet. And by clicking on that, it brings up an Explorer window to have you give it a name and place it in a location where you'll find it later. Now, once you have everything satisfied price-wise, you do have the ability to auto-round. Now, by clicking on this, I just auto-rounded everything up regarding my material. I have my order quantity added, and this is the adjusted order quantity. Everything is in whole even numbers now. This is what was measured, this is what was added, and this is what we rounded up to, because you can't order partial walk pads or partial studs and things like that. So you want to round it up. So by doing auto round, any item that was set up to be auto rounded is now rounded up. So you have some whole numbers to work with when you order your material. Now, if you have items in the job that you know you're not going to use once you get to the pricing screen, let's say cleanup is included in my setup with my material. I can choose to turn it off, and as you see, it promptly disappeared, and it doesn't just stay there but turned off. How you would get that back is you have some options up here, item options. You have include off item, flagged items only, and non-templated items only. If I choose include off item, it'll bring back everything that's being used in the job that's turned off. In this case, here's my cleanup. Simply going to turn it back on. Now it appears in green. I can go back and choose to turn off my off items if I don't want to see those. So all those other items will disappear. Now with that, we also have some item options, or excuse me, column options. This allows you to add specific columns to your view. One that I like to have is user code, and maybe you want to see subdivision. By clicking on subdivision, I now have specific user codes here that I can see and which subdivision they're tied to. And you can also make changes here on the fly if you need to change a user code for an item, and then choose to mark that and send that back to the database with a new user code. Now, if you just want to see something like waste percent or user codes, view options on the far right allows you to do that. If I click on waste, it's just going to give me the estimated quantity, the waste percent tied to that, and here's my lap sealant with 5%, and what the waste quantity would be. The fact that these numbers match is because there is no waste quantity, so it's just giving you what that whole number is. In this case, it's adding 5% to my lap sealant for a new total of waste quantity. To get back to my previous screen, I simply hit the $ again, and that'll take me back to my full pricing view where we were before. Now, another thing is if I have some specific items that I want to mark up at one time, we do have a tool called Adjust Marked Lines. And by marking some items, it lights up this tool. It allows you to put in a unit price to mark it to. If I put in $10, everything I marked would be a $10 price. I also have the ability to mark up by percent or mark down by a percent just on the items I have marked. So that's a quick, clean way to mark things in multiples as opposed to going to each line item and doing them one at a time, especially if the price or percent is going to be the same throughout. Now we're going to go over to the labor screen now, and that's the little clock at the top to the right of the $. And we do have some items here that need to be satisfied. But first of all, I'm going to go through what some of these columns represent. The EU is the estimated unit, how things are perceived. Is it measured in lineal foot? Is it an item that is calculated by the each or by square foot or square? The cost per EU would be the cost per each unit. In this case, I'm for a pitch pan, the EU would be the pitch pan itself, so that it's looking for a cost there. And then we have EUs per hour, which are basically how many pitch pans in this case can our crew of 2 do in 1 hour. So there's different ways you can look at your labor. In each one of these, depending on how you look at EU per hour, hours, cost per hour, or man days, anything you hear that you fill in will back calculate the other fields. Now, if I can simply put in EU per hour here, and if you do click and you do not have the ability to add a price, make sure your production multiplier is greater than 0. In this case, it's 0, so I'm going to put in a 1. This is more like the baseline of our production that is sent back to the database, and I'll show you that in a second. Now I'm able to enter a price for my cleanup labor, which would probably be, let's just say, $100, or 100 eaches per hour. And now I satisfied that. And if I wanted to save that, I can mark it, send it to the database for my cleanup moving forward in new jobs and the existing. Now, if I come down to, I have a labor here for a seam, that's looking for a user code. So I come over here, I can simply run the wizard again and have it ask me questions pertaining to that. Or the one column I like to have added is the user code, because you can kind of see things on the fly here. And what is not set up here is seam, looking for that user code. I can simply just click my labor default and select a roofing labor. Now my user code error went away and my seam labor has been satisfied. And if that's going to be my production moving forward and I want to see that in the database, I can simply mark that, go send to DB, and put in production rate as well as the user code since I assigned it. Now, much like the pricing screen, you do have the ability to add extra columns. You have your view options, labor, or if you just want to see user codes. And to get back to that, you just hit the labor again. And you also have the include off items, flagged items only, or non-templated like we saw earlier. Now, another thing you have the ability to do is once you get all your columns that you need and like to see in your pricing and labor screen, you can move these columns in order that you prefer. So I select, let's say, the net cost here, and I want it to appear to the left of cost per hour. I simply left-click my mouse, hold the mouse button down, and drag it over, and now net cost is next to to the left of cost per hour, and that goes with anything. And these settings do stay with the workstation. It's not assigned by user login. So if you log in on another machine, you will not see the same sort that you set up. That's all set up in the program on that workstation and saved that way. Other things that you can do here, again, is download as an Excel spreadsheet. You can mark certain items to run reports on. Go to your recap screen here. One example here, I want to show you real quick. If you do see you don't have your user code set up and you do happen to go out to your recap, and in this case you have another subdivision set up here, and it says default, and you have your usual subdivision, whether that's for acoustical, interior, or roofing. It'll display your roofing here, but it'll also give you your bottom end number and a default subdivision with a quantity. Well, that's a red flag telling you that you have an item that's not quite set up properly. And that's why I like seeing that user code column in the pricing and labor screen, especially when you create new items. You don't have to run the wizard on it. It jumps out at you with a labor default or miscellaneous default item with an asterisk, and you can simply select the labor that it needs to be. And when you go back out to your recap screen, you'll see that you have one exclusive subdivision and nothing that says default. And with that said, I appreciate your time today. Any questions, please ask us, and we'll get them answered for you. And it's back to you, Tammy.
Thank you so much, Steve. Thank you, everybody,
You're
for
welcome.
joining. Again, we don't have any questions for the entire group, so just make sure that you grab the shortcut key PDF and answer our survey. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next month.
Thank you.